we're too free and we need accountability. Someone has to call us on our bullshit.
I'm Elysia Skye, and this is the Brilliance Method podcast. Through mindful, motivational, and often hilarious conversations with thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and executives, you'll discover new ways to create your life on purpose. Hello, my friend. Welcome to the Brilliance Method. Make sure to get involved in my podcast community, receive bonus content and more at patreon.com/The Brilliance Method. And today we're hanging out with psychotherapist and author Ira Israel, who I have had the pleasure of spending in-person time with, which isn't always the case with my podcast guests. We got to hang out and get some tea in West Hollywood, and he is a gem. And I actually found him through a friend of mine, and Ira, you already know this, but my friend Ingrid had found you on TikTok, and she said, wow, check out this guy. He's spiritual, and he's a therapist, and he's talking about the mind and consciousness, and he understands the scientific background. Like, he needs to be on your show. I was like, oh, you're right. And so I've loved your TikTok content and Instagram and everything else. I've read your book. I love it. So all of the links to all of Ira's magic will be in the podcast description below. Hi, friend. Here we are.
How are you?
I am amazing. I've been looking forward to our time together. We've had a few conversations leading up to this, and your world is so full, Ira, of just beauty and history and perspective. And as I mentioned, compassion and kindness. And it's just what you do, how you speak, how you see the world is the perspective that I want to have more of on this show. So I'm really grateful that you're here, and I want to get right into it because there's a lot of psychotherapists out there that are not necessarily spiritual or have the background and experience that you have, and also have been through some of the shit that you've been through. So how did this begin? How did you create this experience that is Ira Israel?
Well, I would say thank you very much for having me on the show, firstly. And as you know from the book and from some of the talks, there was a car accident in 1985, and it set me on this journey for 25 years that I didn't know I was going on. But it's funny, I was talking about this yesterday while I was recuperating in bed with a shattered leg. I saw the movie by chance, however you want to frame it, The Razor's Edge, which was remade by Bill Murray after he made all this money from Ghostbusters. That was like his passion project. And, this guy, Larry Darrell from Somerset Maugham's book, he almost dies, even though that's not a great phrase. He has a near-death experience. And then he realizes that this cushy life of stockbroker and wife and all these things, it could be inauthentic. So he goes on this journey to India and all these things. And it's there from watching this movie when I was 19 years old that I just learned, like, what the Upanishads is. And, it set me down this rabbit hole. It was obviously a very large rabbit hole if it took me 25 years. But for 8 years, I studied existentialism, philosophy. I got a graduate degree in philosophy, but I moved to Paris. And, in all of their literature, music, and film primarily, there are these existential questions. What's the meaning of life? How do I be authentic? What really matters? Things like that. And then in 94, I walked into I'm almost 6 feet tall. So I was in Thailand, and I walked into a door frame. And I totally messed up the top of my head. This is in Koh Samui. And we were on this beach, Lamai, and we had this little pamphlet. And it was a strange experience. But this woman, I said, oh, excuse me if I'm not my normally chipper self. I cracked my head on a door, and there was a gash. It was pretty gnarly. And she said, let me heal you. And I said, no, thanks. Like, I don't believe in witchcraft. And she's like, this was Koh Samui in 1994. There weren't even roads. So she's like, there's no hospital on the island. There's nothing to do. Like, aspirin's not going to fix this. Let me heal you. So I was like, sure. So anyways, to make a long story short, she did Reiki healing on me. And it was fascinating because what happened in my head was, if this is true, this stuff that we consider to be like an aberration in terms of our scientific model, if someone can heal someone else like with their hands, maybe all of Western philosophy that I've been studying for 8 years is misguided. So that pivoted me onto this path of studying Buddhism, Hinduism, and Kabbalah. I went to film school, and then I got a graduate degree in Buddhism, Hinduism, Kabbalah from UCSB, and I studied with some really interesting people. And so there was 8 years of studying philosophy. Then there was 8 years of studying spirituality. And then I got into a rather dysfunctional relationship, which was the equivalent of the car accident or the head gash. That got me studying psychology. And so it's like 8, 8, and 8. And then I was teaching at Rodney Yee's studio in Oakland in 2009, and a woman came in, and your listeners will appreciate this. A woman came in, and I watched her back open up and her arms go in downward dog, and I heard a voice. And the voice said, "You've been indulgent. It's been 25 years of learning. It's time to give back." And I went over to her and I said, her name's April, "How would you like to make a yoga DVD?" And so the graduate degrees in philosophy, religious studies, psychology, I also studied parapsychology at Duke University, and film school all collapsed into that moment. And starting that afternoon, I made Yoga for Depression and Anxiety. And 3 months later, it was the #1 bestseller on Amazon. Yeah. And then I took the proceeds from that and I made Mindfulness for Depression, Mindfulness for Anxiety, Beginner's Guide to Mindfulness, Beginner's Guide to Happiness. So I made a series of DVDs. And then that got me teaching at Esalen. And then at Esalen, that got me my book deal. And it's just like, so the way I would frame it is car accident, 25 years of seeking, and then falling into, I don't know how to frame it, just living my purpose since 2009, which is essentially teaching and raising consciousness and just trying to really make the world more authentic and compassionate and less, I feel like our society in some way, and we're at a very pivotal moment, but we're misguided. Most people are misguided. And so if they come to me and they say, "Oh, I'm suffering from depression or anxiety or OCD or whatever," I try to reframe things from other paradigms. And, sometimes it works. Sometimes people are open and sometimes people are locked into their paradigm. And then I am useless to them.
Wow, that was the most impressive life summary I've ever heard condensed down. Thank you for that. I have so many questions, and I would like to start with the Reiki healer in Thailand.
Shelley King, 1994.
Did she heal you?
Well, oh my God, she set me on this journey because she ran her hands, put them on she never touched me, put them on over my skull. And then after, I saw sweat beading on her lip and it was cauterized and there was no pain. And then she ran her hands down my body and she goes, "You're full of shit. You've been partying." I lived in Paris and I was probably drinking too frequently, if not too much. And she was like, "You really need to clean out." And it's through her I was introduced to yoga, Hinduism, Buddhism, meditation, everything. I ended up spending a week there, also doing 3 24-gallon colonics per day, fasting. And it totally changed my life. But I have a crazier story if you want to hear this.
Yes, I do.
So there was a woman I was seeing in 93, and she was in my apartment in Paris, and she said, "Let me pull tarot cards." And I was like, "No, thank you. I don't believe in that." Like, whatever. and she pulled them anyways. And she was like, I would say she was hitting singles, she was hitting doubles, right? And then she pulls a card and she goes, oh, look, you're going to go on a trip far, far away, and it's going to change your life forever. And I swooped up the cards and I said, these cards are shit. I'm not going fucking any place, right? And 3 weeks later, my accountant called me and said, hey, I just got this pamphlet for Koh Samui, Thailand. Do you want to go? And it was Christmas in Paris. And I was just like, sure. So I went on a trip far, far away. I got hurt. Shelley King healed me with her hands. And then I studied parapsychology at Duke University and Buddhism and Hinduism at UCSB, and have been, on this path for quite some time.
Wow. It's interesting because you said a few minutes ago, if people are not open to that kind of thing, like you can't help them, right? They're not for you. But yet again, you were not open to some of those things
right
on the surface, but deep down on a spiritual level, Ira, you're such a seeker. So, for anyone listening or watching right now who feels like, yeah, I don't know, I'm on the, my audience is pretty open-minded and very energetically motivated to heal and have a great life. But there are certain things that some people go, yeah, but that's too far. Or,
right.
Okay, yeah, I'll do this or I'll do that, but that's a little bit much, or that's a little bit out there, or witchy or weird or woo-woo or whatever. But, when we just try something, when we just go, you know what, I'm curious enough, or I want to feel better enough, or I want to get out of town, or I just,
right.
I just want to be happier. We get to that catalyst for change. And that is what sparks that moment that could shift everything for us.
So for me, my mandate has been and is one word, astonishment, atonement in French, right? And there's a book on this because Lacan speaks about it, but also Wittgenstein. So you have two different threads, and I think that the best we can do is create the preconditions for the possibility of whatever you want to call it, astonishment, which is kind of like God, or, just to come through, whether it's in artwork, literature, music. You have to actually go to the show and be there, or go to the movie. I want to be open to beauty and wonder and things gently shifting my paradigm. My paradigm's been rocked several times, and I kind of have an understanding, I think, of the universe in terms of spirituality and what's happening. I know where to go when I need fresh perspectives.
Where do you go?
I went to a hypnotist the other day, and I seek out different healers who I think can teach me something. I'm seeing a cranial sacral person on Friday. Friday's my birthday. My birthday present to me is seeing this other healer. And it was so weird because I had a patient talk about her. And then I went to a neurologist because I have some neuropathy in my arms. And he's like, you should see this woman, whatever. And I was like, wait a second, is that the same person that was recommended?
How cool.
Last week? That was fucking cool. Like, it's totally disparate people who don't know each other. And there's, 10,000 healers here. But I was like, okay, I got to do this. This is my birthday present.
There are no coincidences.
Exactly.
Well, one of the things that I feel like we connected about initially was both of us are on a mission to encourage people to be authentic. And authenticity is a theme, not just in your book, but in your work entirely. And, in hearing your story, you have been on your own mission of like, well, how can I let go of that old belief and way of being and just try something new? And like, you being that seeker is you being in your authenticity. And so then the universe conspires in our favor and these incredible opportunities show up. So for everyone who's paying attention right now, if you want to create your life and manifest more magic, part of it is just being open and being even more authentic. So I'd love to talk about authenticity.
Great. So there's a Buddhist adage, one mountain, many paths. And for me, if you want to talk about it, I mean, we discussed it when we met, but like DMT is the rocket ship up the mountain. Ayahuasca is the helicopter up the mountain. Mushrooms, MDMA, and ketamine are the cars up the mountain. And yoga and meditation are walking up the mountain. So it's really interesting to me because we need to be able to go past the noise, go to the other side of thoughts. And that to me is one level of authenticity. Tat Vamasi from the Upanishads, from the Katha Upanishads, like you are that, you are the universe, you are God. And so I think that the prefrontal cortex and the Western lineage from Kant through Hegel doesn't understand that the dialectic is a foible of consciousness. Like the prefrontal cortex is essentially an either or binary machine. So if I'm walking around all day saying Tat Vamasi, I am God, and I walk into the coffee store and cafe, I'm just another psychotic person. Which I could be also, but I'm reading Lee Sinella's book, Kundalini and Psychosis. That's why I say that, because the experiences that some people have, I have a lot of patients who come in and say, oh, I've been institutionalized. I had this missed thing happen. And I go to these books and talk about that level of authenticity. And I've written about this because R.D. Laing said that schizophrenics have the most pure assimilation of all the phenomena and all the stimuli of any human beings. But we kind of don't like schizophrenics because they have their own thing going on. Mm-hmm. So, but we all have to realize that we all have our own thing going on. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that mediates between us is this language, which we made up.
That's right. So, and I had a schizophrenic boyfriend in high school. And this other personality of his would usually come out at night, and I just knew how to navigate it.
There is that level of authenticity where we'll call it like the spiritual level, where everything that you perceive through your five senses and chunk into a narrative is Maya, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then at that other level, Tat Vamasi, you are every particle of the in the universe. You just are experiencing it through Ira, and then after that, there's psychology. And for me, attachment theory, but I've been studying Lacan for the past 10 years. So even when I talk about attachment theory, I have to frame it through capitalism, because I feel, and everyone will disagree with me, but that's fine. I've been doing this for a long time. Like as mammals, we're supposed to be on our mom's breast or for 4 or 5 years. Right. Mm-hmm. And instead, what we're trying to do with science is make babies productive members of society. So we have these things: breastfeeding for 18 months, potty training at this age, da 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 da. But it's all under the guise of capitalism. And then you cut to 20 years later, and this person is anxious, or this person is depressed. And for me, if we all lived on desert islands and played soccer and picked mangoes and lived with 150 tribe members and didn't have to go to our cubicle and sit in front of these screens, I ask, would this person be experiencing those symptoms that we characterize as depression and anxiety? Probably so not. I think that if you want to call a lot of the afflictions from the DSM trauma-based, I would be okay with that, because I feel like it's very traumatic to be a baby in our society, and for people to just be speaking in a language you don't understand, like do this, don't do that, don't put your tongue in a socket, don't walk out into the street, don't stab your sister with a fork, don't do this, don't. And then you wake up later, 25 years later, and you have negative self-talk, and you're like, wow, I wonder where that came from.
Yep. I was even told by, I think she was an acupuncturist, I was dealing with really slow digestion. And she had said, well, when you were a baby, and for most of us, our parents are changing our diaper and making disgusting faces or, sounds that are like, oh, gross. So what are we doing? We're consciously telling our kids, hey, when you poop, it's gross and bad and we don't like it. So that affects us too.
Totally.
Gosh.
Yeah, I'm of the belief because I've been exploring this, that essentially everything that's taken into our senses for our entire lives, and I'll be 59 on Friday, you could remember it, you might have to be hypnotized, but like if you asked me the license plate of the car that went by me on Hope Street in 1974 when I was standing in front of Bill and Fred's, like I could get it. It's there.
Yeah.
And I've seen people use, like Darren Brown, use mnemonic devices to get memories back. Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating. I went to hypnotherapy college, and in studying the mind from that perspective, they talk about how most of our memories, and actually a lot of our personality, that's developed between 2 and 9, is like where our trauma responses come
Absolutely.
from. So when you do hypnotherapy, you're kind of going into that age bracket to like retrain, heal, soothe, that kind of thing. And I have a lot of memories from being a baby, things that I've asked my parents about, that they're like, you remember that? Like, how do you remember? They're like, I have a crazy memory. And I wonder how other people can just remember without hypnotherapy. Like, how do we do that?
It's so funny. What brings to mind is I haven't read it in 25 years, but the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche, I believe, and it's, ghostwritten by Andrew Harvey, who's a genius, but a little nuts. They talk about why you can't remember your past lives. And because it would be too overwhelming. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, does remember his past lives. But, he's got his own, agenda. Which is for our benefit,
right? But I was going to say we're
we're the beneficiaries of his everything.
That's right. Well, when I do readings for people, usually the very first thing that comes through is a past life, and it's just something that just has started happening more and more and more in my readings, and they come through not to necessarily heal or for entertainment, but it's to show me where there is karma that is still playing out in this lifetime. And I find it fascinating. And and for anyone who's interested in past lives, and you mentioned in your book too, what's the name of the doctor that studied children's past lives?
Dr. Ian Stevenson, psychiatrist, the head of psychiatry at the University of Virginia, documented like 40,000 cases of children who remember their past lives. There were 11 who had wounds on their body that resembled how the previous incarnation was killed. And then there's these really intense cases of like 2-year-olds in Minnesota that speak fluent Arabic or Hindi or another language, but before they learn English, and they're supposedly an incarnation from, but he's done, I consider to be, scientific research on these children. My personal theory, because he talks about the inability to remember these past lives after the age of like 8 or 9, I think that language acquisition squashes these things out. And I also think that the people in the tribes in Africa who speak in cliques, I think that they're communicating more or less like telepathically. And I think it's because we learn, English now has, I think, 2 million words. I feel like these abilities that we consider to be paranormal are kind of like squashed out of us, but they're there. They're part of our reality. And, odd things happen when you can either, whatever you want to call it, get into the flow or get into the zone, and that's also, again, wrapping this around to astonishment. You have to, if you wake up in the morning and have a bottle of gin and go out and mouth off the police officer, like, you are not going to be in the flow. You are not going to be in the zone. So you have to like figure out the structure of your life so that you have the opportunity to experience the divine.
Yeah. And people are seeking structure more and more now.
I'll give you a great quote because I was just writing about it. Sartre said, "Man is condemned to be free." And I actually, this was what I got from the hypnotist, because he's not a psychotherapist, and before he hypnotized me, he basically smacked the shit out of me. So I call it smack therapy. And it's because we're too free and we need accountability. Someone has to call us on our bullshit. Mm-hmm. And, well, listen, sometimes, people come in, and I write about this at the end of the book. Parenting's the most difficult job in the world because you're trying to instill mutually exclusive characteristics. You're trying to have your kids have healthy self-esteem and also healthy self-regulation. So if you're too oppressive, they'll have good self-regulation because they're imitating you, but they'll have low self-esteem. They'll think whatever they do is not good enough. And on the other hand, if you enable them, you think the sun shines out their ass and they know it, they could end up like the president, a terrible narcissist.
Yeah.
So for me, it's finding that razor's edge of self-discipline, self-regulation. And when someone comes into the office, I kind of calculate. And then if they need their self-esteem boosted, then I don't make suggestions that could land as criticism. I'm empathetic. And then if they have, like I said, I needed to be smacked on Tuesday. If they have too much freedom and they need to up their self-discipline, then they need somebody in their life to be the moral authority and say, bad Ira, like one glass of wine, not two.
Yep. Yeah. Accountability is something that I've brought into my coaching business right from the beginning because I need it. I require it. And it's not a bad thing, and nowadays with everyone either diagnosing themselves or getting diagnosed as ADHD, we're seeing an uptick in the desire for body doubling. And that's been really interesting too. And I remember, I want to know what that little eyebrow head move meant. When I was a kid, my mom would say, clean your room. And I'm like, but that's boring. I used to have a tape recorder and I would talk into it and like have my own talk show. Like clearly this is what I'm meant to do. And I was like, I want to do my show, and she's like, you got to clean your room first. She's like, who's going to watch your show if it's a messy room? That's why the camera only sees this part of the room, by the way. And I would call my best friend and I would say, hey, Anne, can you talk to me on the phone while I put my laundry away? Because I don't want to do things that are boring. So I'm like, okay, little Princess Elysia, why is your perspective that cleaning your room is boring? What if it's a beautiful ritual? What if it's a sacred act? What if you put your shit away after you were done using it instead of throwing it on the floor and moving on to the next exciting thing? So it's like dopamine hit, dopamine hit, dopamine hit. Yeah.
I'll just help you if you don't mind, because this is what influenced me. There's a preface, I think it's the second preface to Nietzsche's book, The Gay Science, where he talks about his convalescence. And then going back to that movie, The Razor's Edge with Bill Murray, there's a scene where he's on the Ganges River that he thinks he's talking to a bum who's sitting there just like washing dirty dishes. And then the guy says, "Oh no, I own all these boats." And then Bill Murray's like, "Why are you washing these dishes?" And he's like, "Because that's where I find God. That's in washing the dishes." And then Bill Murray says, "Hand me a plate, Bishop." And it's really interesting because I get some of my best ideas for my books and things when I'm washing dishes, and when so pantheism and is essentially, we think of Tantra, which means finding God in everything. So that's what I was talking about in terms of the first level of authenticity and spirituality. And again, everyone's going to lambaste me because, of John Wellwood's quote, there's no spiritual bypass. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But there's a way of seeing things. And for some reason, this came up last week, so I'll just mention it now. When I was studying with Eitan at the Kabbalah Center, we had a session, and he said, do you know what the Kabbalists did at Auschwitz when the Nazis took them out to shoot them? They danced. They danced to thank God for giving them hatred to overcome.
Wow.
So I've been in a lot of physical pain in my life. I've had a lot of operations from being a passenger in car accidents. And I have to ask, why I attracted that stuff. Why was I in that seat at the time? 2 seconds later, 2 seconds more, I could be dead or someone else could be dead. And so we all need to develop an understanding of how the universe is operating. And what you said, like conspiring in our favor, is one way of looking at it. And you could look at it as a victim. I'm not sure of the benefits of that. So actually, I am sure of the benefits of that. I just would advocate
promote it. Yeah.
that you don't take advantage of them.
Validating your victimhood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, okay, go on. What else
That's
do you want to talk about?
beautiful. Well, so I think back to the day that my mother died. And I don't think I've told this story on the show, actually. I've talked about it here and there, but this specific thing I'm going to tell you to get your understanding. So the day that my mother died, she was hit by a car and killed. We got in a big fight that day.
So sorry.
Oh, it was awful. Thank you. We got in a big fight. No, I always said, I love you. Always. And that day we got in a fight. I didn't say I love you. And I slammed the door in her face. She left, got hit by a car. And this isn't the point of the story, but something that still comes up for me all the time that I am actively working on. And every time I think I've conquered it, it flares up again that if I disappoint people, they will leave my life forever. So that was like fawning and people pleasing that showed up for so many years. And then I worked through that. And even now it's like, if I think someone's pissed at me, or if they tell me that, hey, even kindly, hey, Elysia, what you said, or what you did, can we talk about it? Like this feeling comes up like, oh my God, I'm murdering my mother. Right. Even though I know where it comes from and I could work through it and it's not real. So much trauma happened, obviously, that day, and maybe we could talk about that, but this is not my therapy session, but just giving you the full perspective. I was mad at her that day and I slammed the door in her face. And then I find out she died and I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And so the guy who hit her called the house, and my parents were divorced. And my dad is definitely a narcissist spectrum, whatever it might be. And so he's now being told, hey, you got to move back in and raise these girls, and like, who's going to take care of these girls? I was 12. My sister was 16. My dad had been in and out of prison, and my dad's there and I'm watching him pace around the room. And the guy who hit my mother calls, and he asks to speak to me. And
You're 12?
I think 12. And I say hello, and he's hysterically crying. He's like, it was an accident. She was crossing the street. It was so dark. I have to live the rest of my life that I took your mother away from you. And I said, it's not your fault. It was an accident and we're going to be okay. And it's okay. And I don't know who that girl was, but then my dad picks up the phone. He's like, you're an asshole. Fuck you. You took the love of my life away, even though my parents had been divorced for 10 years at that point. And he slams the phone down. And what I remember from that day that I'd carried with me for so many years was how horrible of my father, like what an unforgiving, awful person. And then I wasn't counting the fact that he was grieving and he was angry and whatnot, but there's a lot there. But the reason I was telling you this story was, in reflection, I realized later I'm going to be 44 on Thursday.
Wow.
Day before your birthday. So happy birthday this week, Ira.
Happy birthday this week.
I'm so proud of that little girl.
Yeah, you should be.
Yeah. That's how she handled that. And I didn't even remember that for years until a few years ago.
I have an analogous story. I was with Fred Luskin. I didn't know him at the time, but I went to a compassion. It's funny because I went to a compassion conference hosted by the Dalai Lama in Seattle.
Amazing.
In 2008. So I got to spend 5 days with His Holiness, which was life-changing. Wow. And then a year later, I can't remember his name. He's founded at Berkeley, the School of Science of Happiness, Science of Good, something like that. And they hosted a conference, and Fred Luskin, who wrote Forgive for Good and Forgive for Love, was talking, and there was something about him. And I found out later that he forgave the person who hit his daughter, I believe, when they were crossing the street one day. And it had been 25 years since the car accident. And this is why atonement, at-one-ment, forgiveness is such an important part of my book and the process, because it's really cleaning up the past so that you can show up authentically for the present moment and just get rid of all the resentments that your mind is built to create to keep you safe, your defense mechanisms, things like that, like woulda, coulda, shoulda, didn't. Oh, I'd be happy now if I didn't have these scars on my face. Oh, I'd be happy now if life isn't like that. You do have scars on your face. The sooner you accept it, and forgive. So anyways, after 25 years, I did find the driver of the car, and I decided to write a long letter to him. I found him on Facebook, and I sent the letter the day after the Compassion conference, and we engaged in a dialogue for a week. Then at the end of the week, I decided to try something new, which was letting down my hatred and anger and resentment and whatnot. And I said, he apologized, and I said, I forgive you. And, I had created like a fake profile, and I just deleted it, and we never spoke afterwards. But it's such an important way of claiming, your life back and showing up and being able to show up in an authentic manner. So I thank Fred Luskin, and I give his books to practically all of my patients.
Wow. I haven't read that one. I will look it up, and if it's appropriate, I'll add it to the links below as well for people to look up. Yeah, forgiveness is everything.
Yeah.
It's, in my opinion, it's our path to everything. And
that's why I love the word atonement, at-one-ment, because, and this ties back to the spiritual thing. Like you are on that level, whole. And it is your defense mechanisms, which you consider to be normal. Like, I hate this person because they caused me 2 years of pain and all these scars. Fred explained, like, you're only hurting yourself. It's like carrying around these negative emotions. And the way to get rid of them is through forgiveness. So I tried it, and it worked. And I'm not proud that it took me 25 years to learn. I'm not an early adapter.
But how amazing that you learned it in only 25 years and in this lifetime.
Yeah. It only took me a few lifetimes to learn.
Yeah, there's a great book, and I'm actually one of the narrators on the Audible for it. It's called The Lifetimes When Jesus and Buddha Knew Each Other. Oof. And it's given to Gary Renard, channeled by these two ascended masters who visit him in all his books that he writes. And it's beautiful. A lot of forgiveness principles, a lot of Course in Miracles principles in there. But what's very cool about these teachings, and many you can historically document. When I read this book, I was like, man, it makes so much sense. I had never thought before that these master teachers of compassion and forgiveness, we never think about their previous lifetimes. We just think about Jesus's final lifetime, right? And or that was his only lifetime. And it's like, wait, no, he was like a dude. And there's these fun stories of when they were friends in different lifetimes and fought over a girl and all this stuff. I'm like, I love when we get to remember and humanize our teachers and these gurus, and it's like to get to spend almost a week with the Dalai Lama, and just see him be human. It's like, I think that's critical in order for us to have that connection and see vulnerability and see authenticity. And then it actually opens us up to be able to learn more. That's why I want to have you on the show and other great teachers on the show. It's like, hey, we're just human. We're so weird. And
I make a joke and I say, I don't think you can teach anyone past the age of 10 years old anything, but you can inspire them. So for me, showing up as a teacher, if I believe that, and I do, means that I have to model authenticity And I also have to, this is the last part of the book is congruent, where I say, I quote Andre Gide, where he says, it is better to be hated for who you are than to be loved for who you are not. So we're taught to put on these facades and to talk about status symbols, like the hotels we stay in. And if we fly, everyone here talks about fucking, so sorry, if they fly coach or if they fly business or first class or private. And it's just like, it's the weirdest thing in the world to me. I half the time I'm just sitting there and some people virtue signal, they're like, I flew coach, or, and I'll be like, it's like, yeah, it's the things that people talk about in order to try to gain love and acceptance are bizarre. There's a quote that Bruce Fink said it at this last, like, he translated a lot of Lacan's work at Cri and whatnot. He said, every speech act is a request for love. Anytime anyone uses a word, they're actually saying, love me, love me, love me. And so when I'm sitting there in the cafes and I hear people talking about status symbols, which is essentially affinity grouping, they're looking for their tribe, but they're doing this in this elitist manner where they're like, oh, you have a $4,000 handbag? I have a $4,000 handbag. We can be friends. I'm not going to be friends with someone with a $1,000 handbag. That's beneath me. We're the $4,000 handbag tribe. And there's football fan tribes, and there's motorcycle tribes, and there's intellectual tribes, and there's art tribes. But it's, we're all looking for the same thing. I quote Ram Dass, we're all just walking each other home.
Yeah.
Right? So what's the point of being an asshole and being elitist and saying, I can't be friends with you because you shop at Trader Joe's and I shop at Air One? It's just like, that whole looking for differences rather than similarities. And I really feel like as a therapist, because of that search for astonishment and that having a sense of wonder and loving being wrong and loving being surprised, I can show up in a way where I am just intrigued the way other people would unintentionally invalidate a patient's experience just because they're looking at they're scrolling and they don't make eye contact. Like for me, I'm there, you have 100% of my attention, and like, let's find the corrective emotional experience that your subconscious is craving.
Yeah, that's beautiful and powerful work. And people deserve that. And they deserve to work with a therapist who gives them that focus and that mindful attention. And people, unfortunately, are not trained to communicate.
Right. I say we should have classes for 7-year-olds on how to give a hug. How to give a non-creepy hug, even though 7-year-old wouldn't know what creepy is. We got to teach them before, like they get handsy.
Okay, how do we give a non-creepy hug?
I don't know, but somebody smarter than me can figure this out. How to make eye contact, how to put the phone down, how to shut the phone off, how to just be there. I mean, we sat there for over an hour at Earth Cafe, and neither one of us looked at our phones because we're fucking adults.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Well, we both teach mindfulness.
Right. So it's so funny. I went to a comedy show with a dear friend of mine, and she had just come back from some trip or something. And she was like, oh, let me show you the photos. And she went to grab her phone, but they had locked them in those little locked bags and whatnot. So she's sitting there, and it was so frustrating because you don't realize how dependent we are on music, podcasts, our photos, text messages, all these things, our connections. And it's a horrible thing. As I say before, there was a professor in the 70s at UCLA. He found that 83% of all communications are nonverbal. So text messaging is like smoke signals or Morse code. You get none of the nuances, and the conversations go awry. They're interpreted negatively. And then for me, I always write about subtexting. Like if you don't respond within 5 minutes, I'm like, what is she doing? you know,
God.
I thought we were having a conversation. I'm like, no, that's not a conversation. Conversation is, this is a thing you have to use for a conversation. It's not your thumbs.
I agree. I had a coach once who had said to me, she's like, you need to, be better about your social media and you need to be posting more, and look, one of the things that my clients come to me for is to expand their businesses. And I do talk to them about marketing. And if they want to do social media marketing, organic marketing, I can teach them and talk to them about it. But where I disagreed with this coach, I go, I don't want to be on my phone all the time. And she goes, well, what about when you're walking to your car? Just do a post while you're walking to your car. And I go, when I'm walking to my car, I'm walking to my car.
Right.
I'm making sure that I'm not going to fall on my sidewalk and that, this or that. And I'm like, man, I studied mindfulness at UCLA. And I remember on one of the first days of class, we did a mindful walking meditation.
Right.
And for people who are not familiar with this kind of work, they're like, wait, what's that? You just simply walk and observe and release thoughts, just like you do in meditation. And you can do that anywhere at any time.
Well, I could say that, and this might come off odd, but I have a 7-speed Honda Civic. And so it's a full body experience, like one hand on the stick shift, one leg on the clutch, one leg on the brake, the other one on the steering wheel. No coffee, no radio, like me in the road, going left, going right, stopping, whatever. And it's just, and the other thing is I have a Vespa. And for me, multitasking is the death of
being.
Yeah, it really, it's not, we're not, we wonder why we all have ADHD and can't concentrate and whatnot. We're just overstimulated. And so you have to be able to decide like what's important. And as I said, my mandate is, where do I have the greatest opportunity and chance of being astonished, to having that spark, elan, come through and remind me that like I am just incarnating this flesh called Ira Israel for however many more years. And, I'm really, a part of everything. And so,
Thank you.
Our show will be right back in 30 seconds. And right now, I wanted to share with you that as a lighthouse, I love shining a light on others. And today, I want to spotlight my friend, Lynn Louise Larson. She's the host of the Cosmic Valkyrie podcast, where ancient wisdom meets quantum science to help you align with your highest self. Every week, Lynn shares transmissions that blend energy, identity, and intuition in a way that is clear, powerful, and inspiring. If you're ready to release old patterns and step into your brilliance, go subscribe to the Cosmic Valkyrie podcast and let her guidance support your journey.
I told you I was going to listen to your book on my flight home. I love listening to books when I'm on an airplane.
It's length for a cross-country flight. It's timed unbelievably. It's 4 hours and like 32 minutes. That's a God shot. The fact that my book is the exact length from takeoff to landing, like LA to any place on the, So anyways, go ahead.
It's true. So that's what I did, right? So thank you. I feel validated that it's hard for me to listen to podcasts.
There was a shift, and I don't know when it was. Think about this, where, you have the 50s and 60s and everyone creating films and music and whatnot. And then all of a sudden I remember, and someone should do a dissertation on this, but the paper started telling you the box office scores of the films on Monday for the weekend, right? And I always thought, like, why is that news? Why in my Stanford Advocate newspaper on Monday morning do they report the box office scores? Because what's the correlation between a movie making $40 million and it being a good movie? Or there's no correlation. So for me, our whole society has been splayed into the 1%. And that's why I kind of don't listen to podcasts. I listen to educational podcasts on either philosophy, or I saw Dudamel conduct Mahler's first. Again, I go to watch Dudamel because he's so much smarter than me, and he's been doing all the Mahler symphonies off book, which means no score. So, there's 200 people on stage, and he knows for those hour and 15 minutes what every instrument, the way he thinks would be the most compelling way to the speed and the timbre and whatnot. So for me, I really, I'm going to get astonished, not from a 3-hour podcast with somebody who hunts deer with a bow and arrow and then addresses them. You have to be very careful about the media that you let in, because for me, there's a lot of things that I can't unsee. And I really want to use, like from Buddhism, discernment to choose for this limited time I have on planet Earth. How am I going to structure it so I have the greatest possibility of leading a meaningful life, which means essentially being of service to others, and then sharing, communing, having lovely experiences, and things like that.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that we don't have a ridiculously fun time and laugh our asses off and like have a blast and do cool shit. It's like, we do. We're just into other interesting things than most people. And that's fun. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the paranormal. So maybe leading into that, I'm going to pull some cards.
Go ahead.
Because I love that you studied parapsychology. I'm mostly curious how that connects to the work that you do now. So just tell us a little bit about parapsychology, what fascinated you, and how you use it today, if you do.
Well, as you noticed in my book, we have a paradigm of Western civilization. And if you study Foucault, he studied systems of thought. So there are systems of thought that influence the way we think. One of them is democracy, which is fake because we live in an oligarchy we have for the past 40 years. The other one is the myth of romantic love, which is based on conflict and based on saving and based on a lot of antiquated ideas from French and Russian literature from the 18th century approximately. Another one is capitalism. It's just a system. So for me, when you experience a woman healing you with your hands, cauterizing a gash on your head, or for me, the other thing is, like, I have these magical experiences where I'll meet somebody. I actually have signed a bunch of NDAs, so I can't go too far into it. But just know that people come to my practice, and I'll give you one example. A woman comes into my practice. At the end of the session, she goes, "Oh, you lived in New York at that time, 94, 95. And it turned out 30 years ago, she had auditioned for me for a role in a film. There's things that happen when two people, I met a woman at the symphony, and it was so bizarre. We went to grab something to eat afterwards, and it was Sunday, and on that Friday night, I had a patient who I was exploring the possibility of a love addiction, and to exemplify that, I used Richard Thompson's song "Bee's Wing." She was as like light as a bee's wing, and there's these words in the song where he wants to possess her, but he can't, and she knows it, and she's like, "You wouldn't want me any other way. Like, I have to be free to do what I want to do. You're not going to possess me, but in your trying to possess me, that's what they're." So I use that to exemplify this guy in this polyamorous relationship and why it wasn't working, and then his part in it. And this is so fucked up. I meet a woman at random sitting next to me at the symphony, and then we decide to grab some food afterwards right here at the local place where I always eat. And she's like, "Oh, I'm meeting a friend." And I don't know what happened, but this happens all the time, I have to say. And I've written many articles about this, and this is parapsychology. So I'm sitting there with this random woman. She mentions McCabe's, and McCabe's is a music store on Pico. And in my mind, for some reason, even though I've never been in there, I had heard that Richard Thompson was affiliated, like he actually owned it in some ways. So for anybody who doesn't know, Richard Thompson is one of the greatest songwriters of all time. He's always like, if you ask Eric Clapton, or if you ask like who's the best songwriter, they'll be like, oh, it's Richard Thompson. Okay. And he's just a mad genius on guitar, like Jeff Buckley. He had a band called the Fairport Convention in like 72, 73, and then he's been on tour. I've seen him do like the history of music. He's a like legitimate genius. So he writes the song Beeswing 20 years ago, and I'm sitting there. I had played it for someone. Someone mentions McCabe's. I mentioned, oh, that's so funny. I just played the song Beeswing for a patient on Friday. It's Sunday. The woman looks at the other woman. She goes, did you tell him? And she goes, no, I didn't. And she looks at me. She goes, Richard Thompson's my ex-husband. He wrote the song Beeswings about me.
Whoa. Wow. That's amazing.
So again, to me, and I walked into someone else's house and I said, do you know this other person? And he's like, that's my wife's best friend. And we have energies. And so we science during the Enlightenment threw the baby out with the bathwater. If you can't measure it on a scale, it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And then, but you and I know that wrapping this all the way around to the first sentences, we're all connected.
Yeah.
There's a study done. I have to do more research on this. When I was at Duke, there was a study done in Russia in 1964 where they took baby rabbits on a submarine and took them around the world, and then they hooked their mothers up to EKG machines. And at a certain point in time, under the water on the other side of the earth, they clubbed the baby rabbits to death. And the mother's EKG machine went through the roof. Now, there's no waves, particles, or anything that we know that go through the earth, that go around the earth, that go through water. So,
But love does.
Right, but it's not measurable. Well, I don't want to get into that because it probably is, but we're not smart enough to figure it out.
Yeah, I think that experiment... that experiment shows it. Pull the card. I'll tell you, I have so many fun coincidence stories that are not coincidences. And even when you and I were hanging out, you were telling me about a forgiveness story and then running into this woman, right? And how this is what's meant to be. When I first moved to Hollywood, I lived at 7200 Hollywood Boulevard at the Hollywood Lanai, right near just west of La Brea, at Hollywood and Formosa. And this old weird blue building. And I wound up only being there for 4 months. My first night there, someone was shot outside the window. So as glamorous as I thought I was trying to be was not the case. So that was 2000. 2008. I am now hanging out with my now husband, then interest, Kalen. And I was like, oh, I'll pick you up. He's albinistic, so he's legally blind, doesn't drive. And I said, I'll pick you up. Where do you live? And he goes, I'm at 7200 Hollywood Boulevard. I go, you're at the Lanai, the weird blue building? He goes, yeah. I go, when did you move in? And he moved in 2004 or 5, something, a few years after. I'm like, fascinating. I'm like, had I stayed there, we would have met. But that's interesting. There's probably, I don't know how many, 100,000 apartment buildings in Los Angeles.
At least.
And we lived in the same building, right? And here's the other part that's kind of crazy. I said, did you ever see a ghost? And he goes, yeah. And I said, I want to describe the ghost. I want you to describe the ghost. I want to know if we both are the same ghost. So we both separately wrote down about the ghost. And I said, okay, 1, 2, 3, I want you to say his name. And we both said Charlie at the same time.
Whoa.
It was crazy, Ira. It was crazy. And I was like, and he said, I go, Charlie never came into my apartment. I used to come up from the stairs and he would open the pool gate and he would swing and he would smile at me with his top hat. He was like this old weird Hollywood ghost guy. And Kalen said, my husband, Kalen said, yeah, no, he was in my apartment. I think he lived in my apartment. And if we had too many people over, he would flip the couch over. He would open the cabinets. He did all, and we would yell at him and say, Charlie, stop. And then he would stop. Again, I'm going to have you back. We're going to talk about more crazy shit. But what are the odds of that? We lived in the same building a couple years apart and we both knew the same ghost.
A year ago when I went to Paris, we couldn't check into the hotel, and I said to my friend, "Let's go to my favorite pharmacy. It's like this Costco. It's a para pharmacy, and they just have like really beautiful French knickknacks, nail clippers, and everything. Everything's like $2-3. It's just fun because you go to Paris and stuff is a little, because of the TVA, it's priced higher. We go there, and standing in front of there, it's so funny because I just saw her in yoga. We're standing in front of there, and a woman in English, like we haven't even put down our bags, says, "Hey, Ira, how you doing?" It's Iona. We had met at my friend Larry Payne's house 13 years ago for like 10 minutes, but we're friends on Facebook. And then later that night, we walk around. We find a place to eat. It's now like 10:30. We take like this photo. It's great. We're walking back on Boulevard Saint-Germain. Across the street, a woman in English, 10:30 at night, says, "Ira Israel, it's Patty. We went to high school together, Rippleham High School in 1982. Like we hadn't seen each other in 30 years. She recognized me from across the street in Paris, right? And then,
Wow.
then even weirder, coming home that Saturday, I look around, who's there in my little cabin on Air Tahiti Nui. And then I'm in customs line and I'm looking around. I like to look at like what people wear and their hair and all this stuff. And I come home, spill out my stuff, take a nap, and then go to Trader Joe's because my fridge is empty. And I spot this woman at Trader Joe's who has this ear thing. And I'm like, wow, that's so weird. She looks just like a woman who was in my cabin of Air Tahiti Nui on a France from Paris to LA. You know what? I'm probably delusional, not going to say anything. That's Saturday night. Monday morning, I have jet lag. I go to a class that I never go to on functional medicine. It's 7:30. I put my mat down. I look over at the next mat. It's the girl with the earring, like right there. So at the end of class, I'm like, this is really weird, but I saw you in Trader Joe's at 7:30 on Saturday night, and you look just like this woman who was in the cabin with me from the Air Tahiti Nui flight from Paris to LA on Saturday afternoon. It wasn't you, right? She's like, yeah, my husband and I flew back from Paris on Saturday. We're Ukrainian, and our parents came from the Ukraine to Poland, and we visited with them, and then we took the flight back from Paris. And so for me, again, astonishment when you can do those things to put yourself in the flow, which for me is like swimming, eating vegetarian, like just certain things, so that I have the possibility of, you sending me, waking up one day and, hey, my friend Ingrid says we should meet, and I'm like, let's do this. And then I called you, right? I called you, you sent me your book, and then I called you, and you're like, who's this motherfucker calling me?
Like a caveman using the phone.
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved it so much. And I talked about that actually on one of my coaching calls. There's all these different ways to get clients. You either pay for advertising, or you ask for referrals, or you go online and you post a bunch, or you can be a guest on other people's podcasts and summits and things like that. And I said, people are so afraid to pick up the phone nowadays. It's like if someone shows up and rings the doorbell, you're like, what's that? But it used to be this normal thing, And so I said,
you gotta look through your ring to make sure that if they kill you, it's on tape.
And then you called me and you said those beautiful things, and you had actually taken the time to download my ebook and read it. Yeah. And you talked about the things we have in common, which is happiness. We're on a mission to help people be happier. Okay, let's pull some cards. So I want you to set an intention. You don't have to say it out loud. And for everyone listening and watching, this is for you too. Okay, Ira, we're going to pull 2 cards. I want you to pull the first one. So you're going to say now when you feel called.
Now.
Okay. And I'm going to pull the second one. Okay. All right. First one. Breath of the cosmos.
Okay.
This is part of your journey, my friend. My will to thy will. Micromanaging the universe. So some of this is also releasing. Releasing, right? Letting go.
Yeah.
Especially the idea of micromanaging the universe and being so in love with theory, so in love with what can we learn? What can we do? And even I just used the word surrendering, but I'm going to use it again, surrendering to just being aware,
Right.
being, just, I love that you talk about astonishment, being in awe. And people nowadays aren't fascinated as much as they used to be because we have everything on demand.
Yep.
And what you study, what you research isn't quite on demand. Now I guess there's a shortening to, we've shortened the time on how much effort it takes to learn something because we have, the encyclopedia of the universe at our fingertips, depending on who wrote the article. But yeah, the breath of the cosmos. And even more, the next phase of your awakening, which is the whole journey of life, we are continuously awakening, I know is going to come not from your research, but from your meditation, from your listening. And as you continue to seek experiences, that's where they're coming. And I love that you seek experiences. And when we got together, you're talking about once a week, you go to this group and, there's people there and they have all these conversations, there's all these dinners. And for everyone listening earlier, when he was saying people are talking about their handbags, it's like, who are you hanging out with? It's like, there's people, he's willing to go out in the world and be amongst strangers. And that's a beautiful thing. And we should do more of that. So I love your presence to being. And that is, you're just on that, your right path, just breathing in the universe. Any thoughts on that last one before I get to the next one?
No, go ahead.
All right. What's coming through for me on this? So all paths lead home, right? You just gave that
Right.
Ram Dass quote. Inner authority, intuition, turn your gaze within.
Right.
Kind of a confirmation of what I just said. My hit for you is you, if you haven't already, fully embracing how psychic you are. You just are. And I know sometimes with PhDs and having patients and all of that, we don't often use those words. So we might use the words intuitive or intuition, which is a beautiful thing. You have this gift also, Ira. You are so incredibly intuitive. And this is just a confirmation to just lean even more into it, fear it not, and embrace it and start telling people that it's one of your superpowers.
That's funny.
Why is that funny?
Well, we have, as a psychotherapist, like we're limited. We have a scope of practice. So if someone
Correct.
comes in and says, I need help, like losing weight, I have to say that's not in my scope of practice. Like it's not, I'm not a nutritionist. It's interesting to earn your living in a particular métier, but be that rogue person doing something, confrontational or doing something, like discerning it from another paradigm, But I use Lacan because he was thrown out of all the psychoanalytic associations in France at various times during his career. So it's been fascinating to be me, to see who accepts things and then who is just like not open to these things. I show up authentically. I have to be so I can't talk about parapsychology with some people. I can't talk about Buddhism with some people. There's that someone said I tried to inflect. They insisted that I teach them mindfulness. And then they accused me publicly of inflicting my religious views upon them. And it was just, I'm just like, what?
Don't they know that mindfulness is a Buddhist
obviously
origin?
Not.
Interesting. Well, I love your openness. I love your willingness. You're a lifelong student and a master teacher and just a brilliant, beautiful human being. And I love how you're just so fascinated. And, I hope that we all can take a page from that book and be fascinated. Speaking of books, tell us a little bit about your book. There will be a link below to buy it. I could gush about your book. I want to hear from you.
So, How to Survive Your Childhood Now That You're an Adult. And I say a path to authenticity and awakening, because I believe that we all have to find our own way. We all have to cut our paths in the world. And we live in this society where we want a quick fix and we want a pill to instantly, be different. But then we don't really want to be different. We just want to feel happy, but we want to be the same asshole. And you can't really do that. So I wrote this book to show the influences of, as I said before, whether it's the myth of romantic love or democracy or capitalism or affinity grouping and all the things we do to try to feel happy. And then there is a science from Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania of positive psychology. People have studied what make other people happy. And it is, as I said, having practices, having the right amount of autonomy and self-discipline, and choosing a structure, designing your life in a way that works best for you. Like I chose to have this at 9:30 in the morning because I knew that I would be in the right frame of mind. You know what I mean? I took a walk this morning. I had 2 cups of coffee. I just knew if you said, let's do this at 9:30 at night, I am not my best self. I'm winding down. But we all have to figure it out. I have a friend here. So
Evelyn.
That's Evelyn. So anyways, how to survive your childhood now that you're an adult. I want people to be proactive and to understand all of the influences in their lives, in their psychologies, and also some things are karmic. And some things are also completely unexplainable. And then your mind craves certainty, and it would rather believe nonsense and bullshit than say, I don't know. And you have to understand that I don't have I have a theory of why I went through this car accident. I have various narratives. They're dynamic. I do have a methodology that has worked for me these 59 years, and I share liberally the 8 years studying existentialism and film, and the 8 years studying Buddhism and Hinduism and Kabbalah, and then the 8 years studying psychology, and how it came together. And I've been living my purpose and raising consciousness about these things. When someone comes into the office, I see where they are on their path, and I try to give them tools, whether it's the Power of Now or the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying or something, and just help lure them so that they continue to have a sense of wonder, and they're astonished.
Awesome. We could have done this episode without ever having a coffee and meeting in person. In fact, I have a lot of people on my show who I don't ever meet in person, but what a beautiful opportunity to get to spend quality time together and get to know each other. And here we are co-creating something that I hope inspires and motivates thousands or tens of thousands of people over the years. So thank you.
And I'll say this too, because we went into the parapsychology, which you liked, that with that Russian rabbit experiment. So I like to. I can feel your energy because we were 2 feet from each other for a couple of hours. I energetically, I can, whatever happened during that time, I feel connected to you now. Mm-hmm. But if we just had done this 2-dimensional, I'm looking at a piece of glass with your face on behind it, I don't even, it doesn't even make sense to my physical body. You know what I mean? It's just,
yeah.
So that's weird. Why I really feel I'm the only person. I only do psychotherapy in person because I need the pheromones. I need to see if you're twitching your leg. So we have to really disconnect from our reliance on these screens and get back to breaking bread, which means, and I heard this wonderful thing this week, and I'll close with that. A woman on Instagram said that there was a scientific study done, and when people open a conversation with "What do you do?" it's very closing. But if you open a conversation with "What's exciting in your life?" it makes them think of positive, exciting things, and then it opens the conversation up in a new way than "What do you do?" which is essentially how can you help my career? When I would teach at Esalen, at the end of the week, there would be 75 people, and over half of them would say, I just spent a week having breakfast, lunch, and dinner with these 75 people, and I have no idea what any of them do for a living. And that is so incredibly beautiful.
It's wonderful, isn't it? When we just get to like have our soul made visible
Correct.
and lead with that. Well, thank you for making your soul visible here today and allowing us to shine a light on you and your work and your generosity. This was so fun. I hope you'll come back. Let's do it again.
I'm always available.
Give Evelyn my love, your little kitty, for everyone
Yeah.
who's listening versus watching. We had a surprise visitor. He's a new kitten. And happy birthday, my friend.
Happy birthday to you too. Us Leos. I'm glad we didn't, we always want to be at the head of the table, king of the jungle. So I'm glad we didn't just rip each other to pieces.
Never. I adore you.
I adore you too. Thank you for reaching out.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'd love to hear how this episode inspired and motivated you. So be sure to leave a comment, 5 stars, and don't forget to follow or subscribe.